Just win.
You try friggin'.
Yeah, but win.
All right,
No, but seriously, just win.
I'll put you against someone, and if you win, you get to live. I'm choosing The Rock.
I'm gonna win.
Unorthodox reactions, unorthodox intro.
Welcome back to another Unorthodox reaction. Today we're back again with a video.
The Infographics show. Evil punishments designed to be worse than death.
Yeah.
Speaking of punishments,
It's another
you know
video.
what I found out once? I still don't know how true this is, but apparently the Iron Maiden was never a torture device. It was never meant to be a torture device.
What was it made to do?
It was just some guy that was just like they had the Iron Maiden thing. It was just like what would happen. Like imagine if we just put spikes on the back of this, and they did it, but they never used it as like a torture device or anything. It was just like there. So it was basically just like a piece of art that was just supposed to just be art, not just be used. And then it just got dramatized in fiction as like a torture device.
Now look at you. You're educating us.
Well, I wouldn't call it educating. I did say I wasn't fully sure, so you know.
But he's just gonna leave me hanging. Yeah.
I don't
No,
feel
it's fine.
comfortable. That
No,
was
it's
a
fine.
very high pressure
Yeah.
high
No,
five.
it's
All
fine,
right,
man. No, it's
that
fine.
was a high five that says your information is 100% true, which
It
is
wasn't
not.
100%.
All right.
Like 80, 70, 60, 45. I take it. Let's get into
Anyway,
it.
without further ado, let's get right into it.
Criminal who crosses the line could find themselves facing the gallows.
Did you
or
read the title?
headsman at any
Yeah.
point throughout
Oh, yeah,
history.
maybe.
Although
That's what led
crossing
us into the
line
conversation
of
can
the high
refer to
five.
Just annoying the king. However, in many places, the death penalty isn't the worst thing that the courts have to offer. Here are 15 of the evil
Are
punishments.
the courts actually allowed to
What's the
torture you?
punishment?
Hmm?
Name one punishment.
Squats.
What?
African punishment, bro.
So how long are
Like,
you
you know
doing
when you
that
have to
for?
squat and hold
Yeah.
the ears between
How's
your
that
legs.
worse than death? How long is how long are they doing that for?
Bro, they'll be like, don't stop doing it until I tell you to. And then they forget about you for like 2 hours. And
Yeah,
you're
but
still
how
there.
long is that person doing it? A prisoner? Are you giving a prisoner that?
24 hours, bro.
Straight off squatting?
Yeah.
How quick are the squats? Is it 1 per second or is it
No,
one
it's
every
like
3
squat
seconds?
holds. Like,
Oh, just hold
squat
it.
and hold it. And don't, like, if you fall,
Your foot, your leg's gonna get numb. You're just gonna go
you
numb.
better hope it gets numb and you don't fall.
And you just don't, at some point, you're just gonna lose feel in your
It's
leg.
like every time you fall, you get, I don't know, freaking a nail hammered in your knee. Or
Yeah, no,
something.
no. At some point, you're just gonna feel no leg. You're gonna have no legs.
Yeah, that's it's gonna turn into like spaghetti or something.
All right, let's go. What's
It's worse than death, administered throughout history. Number 15, flaying. Let's turn the clock back to ancient Assyria, roughly 850 BCE.
The
The
cut on the
ruler
back.
Ashur-nasir-pal II was known for his brutal treatment of captives and rebel leaders. But one method created a special dread for victims. Using a special set of knives, the torturers would slowly remove the unfortunate victim's skin. This was
Yeah.
something they practiced a lot. They not only knew how to remove the skin,
I think they always go for the nipples as well.
for as long as possible. To ensure this, they'd start the cutting at the lower legs, thighs, and the buttocks, all areas without proximity to vital organs, making
Meaty.
it more likely the victim would remain in agonizing pain for longer without bleeding out. This was a highly effective form of torture. and if the torturers wanted information, they were likely to
dude? That looks
I would prefer to die.
That looks
If I had a choice there, I would choose death instead of die.
Your skin. Oh.
Okay, I don't think they do it like that. Like
No,
it's
but, like,
literally just like a cut of steak. Like they just kind of cut it. They don't literally peel it like
No, that's the point.
like peeling oranges.
That's the point.
Not like how it's shown in
Not
this
like that.
picture. Yeah,
But like
that's what I'm
to
saying.
the,
It's
to
like
the
a cut of
extent.
steak. It's like they just kind of slice it off. Like
Yeah.
just, I wonder if they just kind of
It's
do a
like,
little-
you know that little skin part. You know the little skin part here. You know when you get that and you try to peel it off and then it just
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I
It
hate
must
that.
feel like that. Like
I feel like it's like 10 times worse
Yeah,
than that.
that's disgusting.
Yeah.
A highly effective form of torture.
Not even a minute in.
They were
Yeah.
likely to get it quickly. A victim who gave their captives what they wanted could survive the beginning stages of flaying, but the
I think
risk of
waterboarding
infection
would be one that's
high.
on here.
But
Risk
for
of
most,
infection
it was
is
a
high.
prolonged and terrible execution. So how long could someone survive a flaying? The
2
combination
days?
of blood loss, infections, shock from extreme
Oh,
pain, and hypothermia
less than 24
from
hours.
exposure to the elements without the protection of your skin means most people
6
could
hours.
survive few days at the most
Dang it.
after being flayed. The skilled Assyrian torturers
Should've
knew how
stuck
to
to my
remove the
original, I
skin
guess.
smoothly, often keeping it in one piece for it to be displayed as a horrible flag of warning. They were clearly proud of their skill.
They removed the whole skin in one piece.
What? No, that's not what he said.
Look.
Keeping it in one piece for it to be skilled Assyrian torturers knew how to remove the skin smoothly, often keeping it in one piece for it to be displayed as a horrible flag of warning. They were clearly proud of their skill. Torture is
Dang.
immortalized in many of their art pieces from the era, and while the Assyrians eventually passed into history, the method became less common but did not die out. It was a common method of torturing religious heretics in empires for more than 1,000 years, and while using it on a human today would be frowned upon, it's still a common skill for
Unethical,
hunters who want to
let's
keep
just
an
say.
animal's pelt intact for use. But that's nothing compared to what the Persians came up with.
That
Number
is
14,
insane.
The boats. Flaying usually kills people after a short period of intense torture, but other methods keep the pain going for a lot longer. When a soldier named Mithridates murdered the brother of the king wanted him to suffer. Sure, the king's brother had been attempting a coup, but it didn't matter. He ordered the soldier to be taken
brother's a
into
brother.
boats. This wasn't exile. It was something much worse. The condemned could be taken to a pair of boats, with one lying on top of the other. Holes would then be cut in the boat for the victim's head, hands, and feet. So he would be trapped inside. But then the real torture begins, and it starts with dessert? The condemned man is force-fed a mixture of milk and honey, pumping him full of the sweet mixture until he's nearly to the point of
Jeez.
nausea, and left in the sun with the sticky substance drying all over his face and body. And from there, nature takes its course. The sweet mixture starts attracting insects. They land on the man's body and begin sucking it off of him. creating a
Alive.
constant feeling of irritation. Joining the flies will be bees and wasps.
That is evil.
So they
It's
put
not
all
even
of
like
these-
it's not even like excruciating pain. It's just very and mild irritation
Yeah, yeah.
that you can't do anything.
they put it in
that's,
his mouth
That's worse than
and
the
all over his
freaking
face.
like what was it called? What was the first
Flaying.
one? What was it?
Playing.
Playing. That's worse than playing.
So
I
they,
think.
when they put it, obviously that's why it's 14.
Yeah.
Each. So, in case you don't know how the numbers
Oh,
work,
is that how it
Yeah,
works?
it's the higher we get,
I
the-
thought the higher you got, the worse it is. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
the
less
the first
painful
one
it
is
is.
the best
Oh
one.
no.
Oh,
So
I see.
But
I see.
it's alright. It's alright. But like, think
Sometimes you
about it.
just
Like,
don't know, you know?
so like, in his mouth, all over him, right?
Yeah.
And he's stuck in the box.
It's like he can't move. He can't even move his hands to like. He can't do this.
No, he can do this though. Like, shake them off him like that.
Do what like this? How's that gonna help? After a couple times, the fly is gonna be like, "Oh, you can't move." Oh,
Yeah, that's true.
I don't have to pay attention to this movement.
which will be painfully stinging him. And inside the boat, the man's bloated body will release excrement, which will attract worms and other vermin. Inside the darkened boat, they'll start biting at his body and eventually burrowing in, leading him to die a slow, painful death from his body being
Dang.
consumed by vermin. This technique seems to have only been used in Persia, although it horrified the Greco-Roman historian Plutarch so much that he made a special mention of it in his biography of the sadist king who invented it. Was this just one
That's
madman's creation,
disgusting.
or was this a common fate for criminals and traitors in Persia? The answer might be lost to history. It wasn't the only time animals were used to bring death. Number 13.
I think, but another one that I think is gonna be under is. Have you seen the one where like they put rats in like a metal bowl and then they heat up the bowl, and then on top of like this person's stomach they put rats and then they start heating up the pan, and then because it gets hot, the rat starts looking for a way out, and the only soft part
It's to eat fruit.
a way out is like they start like going through the person. Yeah.
Poena Koulé. Roman law was one of the most advanced systems of law the world had ever seen at the time. And that also meant the judges could get a little more creative. When a judge had a suspect in front of him who had been convicted of killing his father, he decided he deserved more than just a simple execution. And there would have been some surprising supporting characters in the mix. First, the convict would have been severely whipped, and his head would have been covered in a sack, at which point he would have been sewn up into a large leather sack. But he wouldn't be the only one in the sack. He would be joined by a collection of live animals, none of them friendly. at which point the whole collection would be thrown into the water to drown, with the idea that the
What?
animals would savagely attack the unfortunate man in their panic as they all sank down to their watery
What did the
deaths.
animal do to
No word on
you?
if the animals were convicted of anything.
Right?
What animals were chosen for this terrible ritual? This varies, but one thing that seems consistent is that they were all capable of causing pain. One common choice was a rooster, whose beak and talons were capable of dealing out a lot of damage quickly. Also common was a venomous snake, who's more likely to bite when panicked.
A dog?
A man's best friend was safe. A wild dog was a common addition. The fourth varies, but
How big is the sack?
to a monkey being included, which might seem like an odd choice unless you've been attacked by them and seen how quickly they bite and claw. One thing is for sure, this wasn't a role any of them were auditioning for. While this was mostly a Roman invention, it's reported that it was revived to a certain extent in medieval Germany. There, only a cat and a dog were used, and they fought like, well,
Cat and dogs.
unlike other forms of execution, this one wasn't about prolonging the torture of the victim. It was simply about making those last few minutes before drowning as horrible as possible. But no Roman execution method was more infamous than this one. Number 12, crucifixion. It's one of the most famous images in religious history. The Christian Messiah Jesus being nailed to a cross for angering the Roman authorities. But while it's mostly associated with religious martyrdom now, it was a common Roman execution method. So common that religious texts refer to thieves and other criminals sentenced for hanging alongside Jesus. And whether you were a rebel rabbi or a common thief, there were few worse ways to die. It served not just as a slow death, but as a warning to others. The crosses were placed in a public square, and the condemned were frequently jeered and tormented by onlookers as they died a slow death. But unlike many of the other methods in the list, crucifixion didn't deal a fatal injury. It just set them up to die from other factors like blood loss and asphyxiation. And the torture started early. The ritual would start with the condemned being forced to bear the heavy wooden cross on their back, often while being whipped. After the cross was placed, they would be nailed to it through their wrists and hung from it. Sometimes the feet would be nailed as well, although evidence isn't consistent. With their arms splayed out to the side, they would be left to hang for anywhere from hours to days. Because their whole body weight was held by their arms, the typical cause of death would be trouble breathing due to the pressure on the lungs. However, elements like heart failure, dehydration, or infection from the wounds inflicted by the crucifixion and whippings can also spell the end of the convict. However long they lasted, it would be an agonizing end. But because this execution method isn't immediately fatal and due to its religious association, today a small group of zealots chose to have themselves temporarily crucified as a penance ritual. At least it's ancient history as a punishment, right? Not quite. It was used in places like Japan and Burma as late as the 1800s.
But Japan was always
being used to torture prisoners of.
It's so surprising that Japan is the lead in something like technology, because they're always behind of the times in everything else, pretty much. So it's always weird whenever I think of that. Like Japan is actually one of the leading countries in like technology and stuff like that.
War during World War II. It wasn't the only
they're like
method that stood
advanced, but all at the same
Number
time.
1, immurement.
What?
Sometimes the most horrible thing to do to someone is to
Immurement.
do nothing. One of the most ancient methods of torture was to take a convict and wall them in alive somewhere and then just walk away. Out of sight, out of mind for those dealing out the punishment.
So they just
But
starve
for
to
the
death.
condemned, they're left alone, in the dark, with nothing but their mind to keep them company as they slowly die a painful death due to either dehydration or asphyxiation, depending on how much air there is in the confined space. If the condemned is buried alive in a coffin, as has happened accidentally to people wrongly declared dead, they'll likely be dead within hours from a lack of air. But if they're kept in a larger space, it's likely to be fairly longer and more painful. While this was commonly used as a method of execution, it has also been used for human sacrifice. But one case was more famous than any other. The Vestal Virgins of Rome took a sacred oath to become priestesses dedicated to the goddess Vesta. They had two main duties: to maintain a sacred fire and to maintain a vow of chastity and celibacy. If they broke the latter, the punishment was dire. They would first be stripped of all their honors and ritually scourged. Their fellow virgins would dress them like a corpse, hold a mock funeral for them, and carry them to a small underground vault. There they would be left in what looked like a small room, oddly containing a couch, lamp, and even some food. And an area where the vault was built would be filled up with dirt and buried. The horrible ritual was conducted around 10 times in the 1,000 years that the Vestal Virgins existed.
Oh, because she just wanted a little
punishment for thousands of years, but how severe it was depended on the circumstances. The murderous Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Bathory was immured within her own castle, but she was supplied with food and lived for 4 years in her palace tomb. Now let's get into the Middle Ages.
Not much of a punishment, is it?
For a reason. Number 12. The breaking wheel. Europe loved its public executions, with everyone from murderers to heretics to common thieves facing their
guillotine.
turn at some point. But for those deemed
Or
truly
is it
loathsome, a worse fate than the gallows
No idea.
awaited them. No one knows when the breaking wheel was first created,
Oh.
but the first references to the torture device can be found in literature from the 6th century. The condemned would be taken to a public stage and tied to the floor, at which point the giant spoked wheel would be rolled in. The goal
Opposite
of this first stage of
directions.
the execution was to exact extreme pain, starting with breaking the legs of the convict by dropping the wheel on their shins. Sometimes this would be followed up by killing the inmate by dropping the wheel on their neck, but this wasn't common because the public demanded more blood than that. In most cases, the
From medieval people were bored.
Very
Like they
bored,
would
They didn't have
they
Netflix,
considered they considered any form of like torture and punishment entertainment. Like what level of boredom do you have to
Yeah,
get
what,
to?
what would you do as well? I would be there. I'm watching that.
I mean, I would be there,
Yeah, I'm
but
watching it.
I'll be like,
Catch
this
me
is
there
kind
at
of messed
8
up,
PM.
but I'm gonna
At 8 p.m. I'm there.
That's what
Shout me.
convict was lifted up once their limbs had been broken and bound to the
RSVP.
wheel in agonizing pain. Their broken limbs often let the authorities snake their arms and legs through the holes. The breaking wheel was then raised on a pole, and the inmate was either left to die, beheaded, or lit on fire. The body was often left up for display on the wheel as scavengers had their way, making this resemble
Had their
crucifixion in
way.
many ways. However, there was always a way out. If the convict fell off the
Why are you
wheel while
framing
still
like
alive
that?
or survived the execution, they were deemed to be spared by God. Their injuries were treated, they were typically pardoned of their crimes, and were in a rare position of being one of the only people to survive one of the worst punishments in human history.
absolutely not. At that point, I'm like, kill me.
No,
Cause like,
you're not.
no, because then do you know like how do you want like if they survive that? Do you know that they're gonna have like severe
Yeah, but
injuries that they can't take back?
no, you can.
I don't think like because
They just
if
respawn.
they dropped the wheel on your legs and it breaks your
It
legs,
breaks your shin. Yeah.
you're never gonna be able to walk again.
Yes, you are.
Would you? If
Yeah.
if your shin breaks, would you still be able to walk?
Yeah, your shin's here, bro. You just put a metal plate in there. The bone heals. You're fine. You
See,
put
I
a
was
metal
thinking
rod in
more
there.
like it literally just break, like your legs bending this way breaks it.
Yeah, no, like there's this video of a basketball player. He broke his leg, like from here, bang, broke, like bone sticking out and everything. But you just,
But it still repaired itself.
yeah, your
Dang,
your
human
body
body
heals
is
itself.
ridiculous.
Yeah, obviously.
The worst punishment often lasted a long time, but few were as disturbing as this one. Number 9. Impalement. How disturbing does a punishment have to be for the man who inspired Dracula to go, yeah, I like that, I'm going to make it my signature? Despite the association with the infamous Vlad Tepes, the Romanian leader didn't create the punishment of impalement. It had been used since ancient Mesopotamia as a way to punish particularly hated criminals. It was a simple method, but almost unspeakably brutal. A large sharpened stake is taken and inserted up the backside of the unfortunate convict and pushed forward until it emerges through the mouth, almost always causing fatal damage. They were supposed to serve as a message, as the stake
It looked
was
like
then
a
raised
chicken
and
roast.
planted in the ground, with the victim still attached to it. In the most brutal cases, fields of these victims were planted as a grim warning to anyone thinking of invading the territory. At least it'd be a swift death though, right? Maybe, maybe not. While poorly trained users would no doubt pierce the internal organs and lead to the person bleeding out in agonizing pain over a few hours, some more modern users figured out how to thread the stake effectively and follow the spine. This caused minimal damage and allowed the person to linger for days, with the record reportedly
Find something better to do, man.
Did you
8
just
days.
say more modern users? Yep, this horrible tactic did not die with
1915.
Vladimir Taylor. It was used extensively by the Ottoman Empire, most infamously during the Armenian genocide that began in 1915.
God.
There are also reports that it was used by the Dutch rulers of the East Indies during the colonial era. Vlad, no doubt, would be proud. This next technique might be the most
That's
infamous
crazy.
execution method of the Middle Ages. Number 8, the rack. Most of the punishments on this list are execution methods that get a little too ambitious with prolonging death. But punishment isn't the only goal of torture. Sometimes the torturers need some information, and the old guard was willing to get a lot more brutal than slapping people with a phone book. Enter the rack, a simple device that looks like an old-fashioned washboard. But this device wasn't used to clean clothes. It was used to create pain. The wooden frame featured a
Why is
roller
it the
and
one that
both ends.
pulls you in all
Stretches.
Hands were
directions?
tied to the top end, while their legs were attached to the bottom end. As the interrogation advanced, The torturer slowly rolled
I
the
think
rack,
cowboys used to do
extending the
that, like
victim's
a
arms and legs until
cowboy
they could
version.
give no more, and it only gets worse from there. Unlike the other methods, the rack doesn't deliver immediate fatal injury. Rather, it deals out slow level pain that gets worse and worse as the ligaments, cartilage, and bones of the arms and legs are stretched beyond what they can handle. This can quickly break a person down, as their shoulders and hips separate and their limbs are ruined. Even if one was able to escape the rack, it's unlikely they could walk after it did its work.
Right?
This also kept the person immobile for future torture, such as using hot coals to burn them. The rack was so feared that sadistic interrogators would often use the rack on one person and force another to watch to try to break both of them down.
Bro.
Use of this device
That is effective. If I saw that, I'm gonna be like, so what do you want? Do you need a notebook?
Yeah, so basically,
Bring all the
Yeah,
pictures you have.
exactly.
I would
And tell you
document it for you. I did not care. I'm not going through that at all. Absolutely not.
mostly died out in the 1600s, but it was reportedly revived in 18th century Russia. But it wasn't the most common method of torture in the Middle Ages. Number 7. Auto de fe. The Spanish Inquisition was one of the most infamous affairs of religious persecution in the world, as the particularly brutal authorities built on the Roman Catholic Church's enforcement of laws. Opposing religion was largely banned. Converts were surveilled and interrogated to ensure they weren't keeping their old faiths, and anyone suspected of heresy was subjected to extreme torture under the authority of the infamous Takamata. And for those who confessed, an even worse fate awaited them. They would be subjected to a ritual of public penance where they would be paraded before the public and abused, wearing garments bearing their accused crimes. Then the authorities would proclaim their guilt or innocence. For some, it would be innocence, as they would collapse in gratitude and relief. But for most, it would be guilty, and horrors awaited them. The punishment would typically begin with public whipping and torture, but it would only end one way. The convicted would be tied to a stake, kindling would be piled under them, and they would be lit afire and burned to death.
Oh, isn't this what they did for like the witch trials?
But the only grace of mercy was that many passed out from the intense smoke before they burned to death. This execution technique is typically associated with witch burnings.
Yeah.
Most of those killed by burning over the centuries, from the 15th to the 19th, were either religious minorities or critics of the dogma and tactics of the Inquisition. And it stayed in Europe. Despite persistent rumors, no witches, accused or otherwise, were ever burned in Salem. Not all these punishments are famous, but this next one is no less disgusting. Number 6. Schwedentrunk. It's a
Clearly
Swedish
German.
drink. Sounds delicious. Maybe
Swedish,
like
sorry.
Lingonberry soda. But for those who were being invaded by Swedish troops during the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, it was no laughing matter. This wasn't so much a traditional punishment as a method of torture and robbery used by ruthless soldiers, many of whom were out of supplies and intended to take them from the locals by any means necessary. It's a simple technique. Force your captives to drink as much as they possibly can, until they give you what you want. If you've ever tried to drink a whole gallon of water as a part of a dare, you know this can get very unpleasant, very quickly, because your stomach can only handle so much. But this wasn't just drinking water. The Swedish troops
My mind's like, just close your mouth. Stupid.
would tie the person up and use a funnel to pour the liquid into the person's
Yeah.
mouth, and the actual substance would be
Would not even be
unpleasant
like
surprise.
water.
Sometimes it would be water, sometimes it would be boiling water, causing terrible internal burns. Sometimes it would just be disgusting.
Someone in the movie
Urine or
one time, they
sewage.
poured,
In
like,
addition to the possible poison
tar.
or infection, this could cause the person's
Like
stomach
lard.
to stretch or burst from the massive amount of liquid. For the soldiers who wanted to add a little additional pain, they would then beat the victim's swollen stomach and even stab them with spears. It's no wonder that most of the victims in the path of this torture learned to just give the soldiers what they wanted and pray that that would satisfy them.
Isn't that kind of like what happened in that movie that you told me to watch?
What?
What was it? 7 or something?
Oh, gluttony.
Gluttony,
Yeah.
Now let's head across the pond for something that isn't as funny as it sounds. Number 5, tarring and feathering. It almost sounds like a cartoon gag.
Yeah, it's the one where like I think they roll you in hot tar and then literally throw feathers at you. I don't know how that's meant to hurt you, but
The
let's
unfortunate
see.
convict gets a bucket of tar dumped on him. And
I mean,
they're all
tar
sticky
itself,
and
just
you
hot
come
tar
up
hurts.
first. They look like a giant chicken. But this isn't slapstick comedy. It's a feared fate for those who angered the mob in 18th century America. The tradition might have started much earlier. It was first referenced in an order by Richard I in 1189, but it didn't catch on until tensions started rising in the British colonies in North America. Angry rebels in the years before the Revolution would protest tax laws by kidnapping British officials or suspected informers, coating them in pitch tar and and covering them with feathers to publicly humiliate them. It was considered a grave insult and good sport for the rebels. But the truth was actually much worse. How do you get the tar nice and sticky? You heat it up.
Yeah, hot
This wasn't
ties.
often the case. Often tar
Painful.
poured on the victims was boiling hot, and when it dried and came off, it would take pieces of burned skin with it. There's no report of anyone dying from being tarred and feathered. Many of the victims were left in agonizing pain and had permanent burn scars. Punishment became rarer after the revolution, but it was hard to keep good torture down. The Mormon founder Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered by anti-Mormon radicals in 1832, and a German-American farmer named John Meintz was subject to the punishment in 1912. His crime? Not supporting war bond sales during World War I, and likely just being a German-American during wartime. This next one might be a bit of a catch-22. Number 4, trial by ordeal. You've been accused of a horrible crime, and the penalty is death. The good news is you can get out of it. You just have to do what? Trial by ordeal goes back to antiquity, when the most common form was trial by combat. This one was actually rather fair. You just go into the arena, fight a guy, and if you come out alive, you're free.
It's not really fair, is it? Because they'll put you against a guy that you have like very slim chances of winning against.
Just win.
You try freaking.
Yeah, but win.
All right,
No, but seriously, just win.
I'll put you against someone, and if you win, you get to live. I'm choosing The Rock.
I'm gonna win.
Yeah, of course.
Prove you're innocent of murder, just commit this other murder. This would fall out of favor eventually, but elements of it persisted in the duels that became common in the West. But in other cases, the odds were stacked against you. These trials would often resemble torture, such as the accused being sentenced to trial by fire. In this one, the accused would simply have to walk barefoot over a field of hot coals or hold a red-hot iron. Sometimes the person simply had to accomplish the painful task, but more often they would be checked for signs of injury and only deemed to be innocent if they somehow managed to escape without getting burned.
What?
The odds aren't looking great.
Right?
But one twist on the trial by ordeal was particularly sadistic. When witches were accused and placed on trial, they often proclaimed their innocence. But how do you prove something that probably doesn't exist? Those who trialed the apparent witches had an idea. The accused witch would be tied up and submerged in water.
That's
The
right.
idea was that the witch would be able to use supernatural powers to escape. So if she managed to escape,
Yeah, it's like stupid.
Yeah.
It's like if you manage to escape, you're a witch, burn her. If you drowned, I guess she's not a witch,
Yeah,
but
she's
she's
dead.
still dead. Because I remember that was one of the things in Little Hope, which was a game that I played like a while back.
Oh yeah.
And they were talking about, I think they kind of used like the Salem witch trial as one of the basis for like the story behind the game. And they showed one of this torture as like, also another one that they showed was when they piled rocks on top of you until it literally just crushes you to death, which I'm like,
That's not fair.
she was clearly a witch and would be put to death. So how would someone prove their innocence?
Drown.
Die. If
Right?
the accused witch drowned, they were clearly innocent and would go to heaven.
That's
according to the
ridiculous.
dogma. Even when the accused wins, they lose. The next punishment has some accessories. Number 3, rat torture. How do you turn
I think it's the
rats
one
into
that I was on
monsters?
about.
The first reports come from Roman Catholic writers alleging torture in the Tower of London during the Elizabethan era. They claimed that as the tide rose and the River Thames rolled in, rats would climb into the prisoner's cell and viciously attack him. Some doubt this happened since rats typically don't attack humans unprovoked.
But
the
when
reports
they
might
need a way
encourage
out.
some people, because in the 16th century during the Dutch Revolt, someone did manage to weaponize the furry plague vectors. A pottery bowl filled with rats would be placed upside down on a prisoner's body, and hot coals would be placed on top of it.
Dang.
As the bowl heated up, the panicked rats would desperately gnaw at the prisoner's flesh to try to find refuge from the heat. Someone called PETA. It's grotesque, and it worked. Rat
Yeah.
torture isn't a particularly common form of torture simply because it depended on living animals doing what you need them to do, but the fear that rats create made it an appealing option for particularly cruel dictators, and it made an appearance in military dictatorships in South America during the 20th
that's
century.
crazy.
Argentina in particular was infamous for using a retroscope to insert live rats into people and letting the creatures dig their way out. It's mostly a horrifying fact of the past, although in 2010, a man threatened his kidnapped victim with rats to get him to grant his wife a divorce.
What?
This next torture is especially horrible because the victim does it to themselves. Number 2, Yubitsume. Japan's criminal scene is
Japanese, yeah.
powerful and secretive, and agents that fall short of a task assigned by their boss often face severe punishment. But unlike the American gangsters who might find themselves wearing cement shoes,
Yakuza.
members of the Yakuza often face another penance, less deadly but bloodier. In
Bushido.
order to atone for their offenses, they must sacrifice a piece of themselves, particularly a
That's
piece of their
right. That also happened in Yakuza. They're like, cut like what, like choose whichever piece of finger you want to cut off, or like if the crime is severe, they're like, I want a whole hand or a whole arm. But it literally depends on how severe like your mistake or your crime is.
What finger you taking off?
Pink. This is pinky. Yeah. I'm bro. My brain is spacing out today. Yeah. But pinky, because it's like pretty much the most useless one.
But what are you gonna take? This, the whole thing.
You have to take the whole thing. Like, and I think, I don't know if this is true as well, but you can't just do it like take the whole thing. You have to do it like 1, 2, like 3 sections or 2 sections. So you can't just cut the whole thing off.
Oh, that's long.
Cause it's meant to remind you of your mistakes. Because like if you carry the scar with you, then you remember not to make the same mistakes the next time. And I'm like, bro, I'm not doing that, man.
Can we do it?
Absolutely not.
Finger. This is not only extremely painful, but is considered to weaken them because the little finger is key to maintaining the grip on the hilt of a sword. It hasn't stopped it from being used for hundreds of years. The penitent Yakuza member begins by laying their hand on top of a clean cloth. They then use a particularly sharp knife called a tanto and slice off their little finger just above the top knuckle. They then wrap up the fingertip in a package and present it as an offering to the head of the crime syndicate. Why would they want it? Tradition, because not only was this ritual used as a method of penance, but in the past it was used as a form of payment by gamblers who fell behind on their debts. The good news is, if the agent screws up again, they can do the ritual again.
As long as they have fingers.
Run out of fingers eventually. Finally, sometimes there's nothing more terrifying than nothing. Number 1, white torture. Solitary confinement is torture in itself. Stripping someone of all their comforts and isolating them from any human contact.
Why is it called white torture?
They at least have a sense of space that they can use to orient themselves. White torture strips them of even that by placing them in a cell of nothingness. The prisoner is deprived of color, giving them a cell where the walls, floor, and ceiling are entirely white.
Even the food is white.
Their clothing is also white, and any food given to them, usually plain rice or porridge, is white as well. Taking this to the
but like, wouldn't you feel like you're in heaven then, or some form of divine place? Because it's just all white. I feel like that's how they portray it in the movies.
Yeah, I know, but so
yeah, you'd go mad for sure.
The cell is equipped with bright neon tubes that prevent any shadows from falling on the cell, and the soundproof cell leaves them with nothing but.
What does a person have to do to earn this?
Slowly starts going insane. An extreme form of sensory deprivation. This was reportedly used extensively in Iran against political dissidents, who could be held for months or even years in one of these cells. It also showed up in Venezuela, and international human rights groups even accused the United States of using it on accused terrorists in Guantanamo Bay, using goggles and earmuffs to block out their senses. But in all these cases, the facilities are tightly guarded, meaning all anyone has to go on is the reports of the victims, and those are harrowing, with many claiming the extreme sleep deprivation left them unable to sleep even after they were freed, and haunted them for years afterward. What about the children? Watch Worst Punishments of Children Through History. If you want to know more about these
that sounds like a good video.
Check out our Worst Punishments in History playlist to see these punishments and more broken down in bloody detail.
Not gonna lie, that was quite a good video too.
That was a really good video. A lot of potential ideas. I don't know where I was going.
Not with you, mate. Personally, I'm fine. On that note, I'll see you guys later.
Like, comment, subscribe, notification bells, all the good stuff.
Thank you for checking in with us. If you're still here, we appreciate you. If you left early, we still appreciate you.
Right.
And hope you stay blessed and look after your loved ones.
And we shall see you in the next one.
Peace.